Hi, my name is Cerrone Foster and I am faculty in the biology department. Today I will be talking with you about study skills, specifically study skills for the sciences. And the first thing that I want to talk about is just kind of getting your mind ready as to why you are taking a specific course. Most students want to just dive into the course and think about, I need to learn all the information so that I can get an A on the test. However, it's more that will go into you being effective in your study skills with just learning and actually studying the material. So here are 4 things that I'm going to cover with respect to study skills and study tips. The first is going to be self-reflection, time management, reading, and it's a method called the SQ3R study method. Then the next is going to be answering test questions. So the first one that I'll start with is going to be self-reflection. At the beginning of the semester, I often talk with my students and ask them several questions as to reflect on why you are here at the university. What are your motivations? That simple question of what do you want to be when you grow up? But that question really does come into play in getting you motivated for studying. Some other things I ask students are specifically about the course. To look at this course and don't look at it specifically as chapter by chapter, but what is it about this course? What are the learning objectives? And what am I learning in this course? And how does this fit into the larger picture, such as my career? I'm going to share with you some data from some students from my particular course, Biology 1110, which is Introductory to Biology 1, and just to see some of their study habits and their perspectives on learning. And this is always good to know because going into the course, you want to have an idea of what you should be doing. You'll find in looking at this data that many of the students don't do typically what we recommend as instructors, such as reading, taking good notes. So you'll be surprised. So the first question that I asked was, how often did you read the chapter before class? And you can see that only 10% of the students always read before class, about 30%, and then the majority of the students said sometimes, and then you had about a good 10% that said never. I'm going to tell you that this information here really corresponds to the grades that I saw this semester in that particular course, where you had a majority of the students, about 50%, had C's in the course, and that here was the continuum of students who had between, A's and B's, but specifically, only about 12% of the students had A's, which you can probably see correlates to how well they read before class. So reading becomes very important. The next question was, how often did you watch the pre-class videos on D2L? And these are videos with respect to actual content that will be covered in class, and they're very short, sort of similar to this one, and they're about 15 to 20 minutes. And you can see that, again, only 10% of the people read for every single chapter. You even had less that did it often. And then you had, which was very interesting here, that you had about 25% of the students that never read before class, never watched videos, before class. And that what I'm going to explain is that all of these methods, reading before class, watching videos, that all these things that you do before class becomes very, very important for your preparation. It's not just one magic method that will work. The next question that I asked was, after reading the chapter, how well did you understand the material? About 20%, 17.8, said that I'm able to describe all the basic concepts that I read. A majority, huge majority, that I can only describe some of the concepts. And then at the end, I had a good 20% that said everything was a total blur. And what I'm going to talk to you about in this particular video is, why is that the case? How is it that you read for hours and hours and hours, and that everything you read is a total blur, or that you only get some of the things out of the chapter? And that's going to be very important in being efficient in what you're doing. I asked the question that now that you've taken this course, how well do you feel that you were prepared for biology? And about 15% said that they were prepared. 35% somewhat, but a huge majority of the students felt that they were somewhat unprepared. Now, let's move on to the second, which is going to be very, very important, which is time management. And you may say, you want me to read the chapter before class, you want me to watch the videos before class, then you want me to answer questions before class, which I'll explain why that's important in a bit. There are so many things that I have to do for class, but very little time to do it. And so I often find that the reasons why students don't do as well, it is not because they're not able to do it or can't function in a high level and high demanding class, but it's dealing with time management. And so here is a particular schedule that I give to my students to help them allocate their time throughout the week. They're not bound by this, but as you can see here, watching the videos and then reading and completing the study guide. And so I give the students a sort of an outline or a study guide to go along with the chapter. So I say about an hour watching the videos, and you can designate a particular day, but then 4 hours. And notice I break this up into 2 days, in that you don't have to sit down an entire sitting and read for 4 hours straight, because you may not pull as much as you need to out of the chapter. But in addition to that, I tell students you shouldn't just read the textbook as if it's a novel, but that you're looking for information. So the study guide that I give the students, that these students should be answering questions as well as reading through the particular chapter. Here are going to be some pre-class questions that I have the students work on. And that this should be done, again, well, every day, an hour, half an hour. Here it's going to be 2 hours. It's a little longer. Then, after you're done with your reading, here are some post-class assignments that you should be doing. And as you can see, the entire week is filled up where you're doing biology for at least about an hour a day. And here's a study schedule, and this comes from the Center for Academic Success at Louisiana State University, but you can have one of these type of planners for something that you purchase from Walmart. But what you find is that as long as you plan your day, find an hour a day to get some studying in for each of your classes. The next one I'm going to talk about is going to be the SQ3R technique, such as reading. Now here's a copy of a page from the textbook that I use in my course, Raven Biology, and it's from McGraw-Hill, and it's actually from the 10th edition. But as you notice, there's some things highlighted here, and I'm going to walk you through how you should go through your textbook. So here is the title of the particular section. It says Carbohydrates, Energy Storage, and Structural Molecules. And I often tell students to just camp out for a bit, and that there's a technique called the SQ3R. S stands for survey, Q stands for question, and the 3 R's is read, review, and recite. So when you look at this particular page, you're going to specifically do a quick overview, and you are going to just get some keywords. That's the survey. Find keywords. So let's go back to the screen and see what are going to be some keywords for this particular chapter. Carbohydrates, energy storage, and structural molecules. So therefore, as you're reading through this section, you're going to see which carbohydrates are for energy storage as well as structural molecules. And what is the difference between a carbohydrate that's an energy storage molecule and one for structural? The next thing is that let's look at each heading. This particular heading talks about monosaccharides. This talks about sugars being isomers, and that this specifically talks about disaccharides. Therefore, you should be able to tell me the difference between a monosaccharide and a disaccharide. And then, what are isomers? These are 3 things that you want to leave this particular section knowing about. And here are some highlighted information that you would want to look at as well. So what we have here on this slide when we begin, we're now going to look at how to read through a figure in the textbook. So here's a figure from the Raven Biology textbook that I use in my particular course from McGraw-Hill. And what you have is, at the title, it gives you the figure number, but it tells you here are polymers of glucose. And then you can ask yourself the questions, well, what are polymers? And specifically, what are polymers of glucose? But it tells you in the heading you have starch, and then you have glycogen. If you look at the figures B and if you look at figure C, you can ask yourself, well, what's the same and what's different? Well, the one thing we know is the same is that they all are made up of glucose. But if we look specifically at figure B, if we go to the text, it tells us B, starch is in plants, and it has amylose and it has amylopectin, which are branched, unbranched, as well as branched. So this particular figure represents starch, but if I go here, it represents glycogen. And what are some similarities is that the amylopectin has some branching, but when we look at glycogen, it has more and more branching. Also, it tells you that glycogen is found in animal cells. It's highly branched and it's insoluble, forming some granules. Therefore, comparison and contrast has already been made between the two. So you can get lots of information just by reading the figure legend, as well as just examining and studying the picture. Last, when I go to the end of the chapter review, here's the section that we studied, that energy storage as well as structural molecules. And when I look at the headings, monosaccharides, sugar isomers, and disaccharides, and then here's that last subheading that we didn't cover in the text, but we look at the figure with respect to polysaccharides, and it's telling us something about glycogen, and then it's telling us about starch and cellulose, which are in plants. And we didn't discuss chitin, but chitin is a structural molecule that's found in arthropods and many fungi. So here you've gotten some specific and just basic information from this chapter summary. Now I'm going to do what we call a concept map. So I've taken topics or concepts or even just vocabulary from the chapter, and it's sort of looking like a word salad or a word scramble. And we're going to take all of these words and we're going to put them together and connect the dots. So of course, what's the first thing that needs to go up there would be carbohydrates. There are 3 types: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and then you're going to have polysaccharides. And if I do some comparing and contrasting and say, well, what's the same and what's different? Well, here for the monosaccharides, the basic units are going to be fructose, glucose, and lactose. And when I think about the disaccharide, sucrose, it's going to be composed of fructose and glucose. And so I make those connections with arrows to show me that these two relate to sucrose. Another disaccharide, which is lactose, what's the connection? That glucose and galactose will make up lactose. Under polysaccharides, we've already discussed energy storage and cell structure, so let me break that down some more. And that the energy storage molecule is glycogen. And glycogen is what? A polymer of glucose, what we learned from the figure. It's found in animal cells, and this is extra information, but it's also found in the liver. Starch is another energy storage molecule, and for cell structure, we have cellulose, and these two form, or come together rather, and the commonality between those two is that they're found in plants. Comparing and contrasting. So we've done that with the concept map, but I like to tell my students to literally write out what things are similar and what things are different. So when we do comparing and contrasting, we're going to use 2 things from this particular chapter. So let's look at those. Plant carbohydrates, and then you're going to have animal carbohydrates. How are they similar? And then how are they different? And you should be able to tell me some things about those differences. So we've already covered self-reflection, time management, reading, and SQ3R. Now let's talk about exam preparation. This is very important. Many students want to know, how do I get an A on the test? And that begins the first day of class with understanding what's required of you and that your studying needs to occur every single day. So let's look at a few things to help you have good exam success. Here you see a pyramid, and this pyramid is called Bloom's taxonomy. So at the very, very bottom is going to be just your knowledge. What are some basic things that you need to know out of the class? And this is just memorizing information and giving it back verbatim. The next is comprehension, but you're going to paraphrase in your own words. Application. Here is where you're going to move to at the college level. You probably did comprehension and knowledge in high school, but for many of your classes in college, it's going to be a combination of a knowledge and comprehension, but your professors are going to be moving you towards the application piece. The analysis. Being able to get some information, take an argument, and literally be able to tear it apart. Synthesis. This is going to be very important, and you'll do a lot of that, specifically if you take my biology course, that will learn the basic concepts here at the bottom of the pyramid. But how can I take all the basic concepts from your chapters and then bridge them together in the entire course so that it gives one complete story? The synthesis part also is that what I learn in one course, how does that bridge and relate to something that I'm doing in the next sequence in the course? And then the evaluation, making decision and supporting views. Now this pyramid chart, Bloom's taxonomy, but this modified form can be found at the Louisiana State website. It's from the Center for Academic Success. Here are going to be some questions. So the first question is an understand question. What makes cellulose different from starch? Well, if you think about what we've already discussed from our concept map and comparing and contrasting, you literally have made your own test question. So if you compared and contrast plants versus animals, starch versus cellulose, you should have an idea of what belongs in plants and what is found in animals. So if we go to the particular answer choices, it says that starch is produced by plant cells and cellulose is produced in animal cells. Well, from our map, we should know that animal cells had nothing to do with cellulose, but instead that the animal cells specifically related to the glycogen. We didn't cover a lot about the structural aspect of cellulose as well as starch being highly branched, but from your concept map, this is one particular feature you should have noted, as well as from figures in your textbook. It says that starch is insoluble versus cellulose being soluble, and that we'll know from our diet, cellulose is found sort of in our wheats, if you think about that, or fiber. I'll say that specifically in your fiber, and we all know that fiber is not digestible or soluble by humans. The next question is going to be apply. So, you can use starch or glycogen as an energy source, but not cellulose because. So this is asking you to be able to compare and contrast some things from the chapter. So the similarity is starch and glycogen as an energy source, and that was on our concept map, but we had cellulose somewhere different being a structural component. And that when we look at it, we should be looking at contrasting themes in these particular answer choices. Who's the same and who's different? Well, here should jump out at you where starch and glycogen have similar structures. You should also note that this is a false answer, that your body does not make cellulose. The last thing that I wanted to be able to discuss is the study cycle, and that this is going to be very, very, very important for your exam success. Recall that studying does not begin the day before the exam or even the week before the exam. It begins the very first day of class. So what I have on the screen here is going to be a study cycle that literally shows you how you should be processing the information. And again, this is another really good resource tool from the Center for Academic Success at Louisiana State University, where you can find more study guide resources. Previewing. Very, very important. If you think back to the questions that I asked at the beginning of class, only about 10 to maybe 15% of the students were previewing before class. And this has a huge impact on what you learn during class, how much information you retain, and then how well you do on the exam afterwards. Attend. You must attend class. I cannot stress enough how important it is that you attend class. And then while you're there, you want to ask meaningful questions as well as take meaningful notes. Review. So after class is over, as soon as possible, sit down. I often tell students that you're going to go and eat lunch or have dinner after class. Just sit down for a few minutes before or after you do those things and just quickly review your notes. Intense study sessions, and I'll cover this in a bit. At the bottom of the screen, there'll be a guide to show you this, but just take some study questions about why, how, if. I always ask my students, what would happen if I take something away or add something? How does this change what you're learning in class in terms of a mechanism, a process? But these are important questions to ask. Weekend review. Take some time over the weekend. Don't go home, but stay on campus. And if you live off campus, come to campus to the library to be able to study and get some information. Meet with your study group, review your notes. And then the last thing you want to be able to do is assess. What do you know? Do some reality checks. I like that. Perform reality checks to say, do I really know what I'm studying? Have what I've done, the methods, are they effective? And do I know the material well enough to teach it to others? And so as you can see at the bottom, this is going to be very important for the intense study sessions, is that what do I want to accomplish in this short time frame? Then once you have your notes, you want to spend 30 to 50 minutes organizing, making a concept map, being able to reread and fill in the notes. Then this is really important to be able to take a break. I even take short little breaks throughout my day if I'm working on something such as preparing a lecture, reading a paper, or writing a paper. This becomes very important. Get a snack, call a friend, and I know many of you are going to want to check Facebook or Instagram, but it's going to be very important that during this study focus section, you do not be on Facebook or Instagram or any of the social media networks that you want to have 30 to 50 minutes of focused time. And then after you take your break and you reward yourself, just come back and do a quick 5-minute review about what have I learned in this particular section. So, let's do a quick recap on just some effective study methods. First, self-reflection. What is it that I know about myself? Identify my strengths and my weaknesses. Then be able to recognize what methods am I currently using? Are they effective? Are they not effective? But I also want to do a self-reflection of why am I taking this course? How does this relate to the grand scheme of things in terms of my major as well as my career goals? And I want you to see that those courses relate not in terms of the content, solely content rather, but in terms of the skill sets that you would learn from this class. The next thing you want to do is time management. That is so important. I find that many students can't manage their time properly and don't spend about an hour a day or 30 minutes a day or just having good time to review their information. So it becomes very important to get that planner out and make a schedule. Make a schedule of when you're going to study. The reading comprehension, going through your textbook, not as a novel, but going through your textbook sort of as a resource. You have defined questions that you want to answer before you get started, and that by the end of your reading session, you should have answered those questions, and you do this before you come to class. Then the last is going to be exam preparation. That starts on the day the class begins, so that every day you are going to be spending time reviewing that information. You're going to preview before you come to class. You're going to attend class. You're going to review your notes after class. And then you're going to have these intense study sessions, as well as finally assess what you know. So before you go into that exam, that shouldn't be the first time that you're answering test questions. And if it's a multiple choice exam, multiple choice questions related to that information. So if you're a first-time freshman, I just want to welcome you to ETSU. I hope that this video was helpful and that you will honestly consider doing a self-reflection, evaluating your study skills methods, and then be open to gaining new ways of learning information. And if you're a returning student at ETSU, again, welcome back. And as well, I hope that this is an opportunity for you to do a self-reflection and look at your study methods for doing biology, chemistry, or any of your science courses. So I wish you all the best this semester, and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.